kilometers from Srinagar, you will come across Burzahom, which could well be described as the Stonehenge of India. A contemporary of England's most famous prehistoric site, Burzahom tells stories of old settlers, trade networks, and perhaps even great astronomical events. It's a cold autumn morning and the local boys are busy playing a game of cricket. This field, covering ancient treasures going back more than 7,000 years, made headlines last year when archaeologists, historians, and we at Live History India raised our voice against the negligence of this critical site. Unimaginable as it may sound, this was used for local IPL-style cricket league tournaments. While you can still find a hint of the games here, things are back to normal. But most people are still oblivious to the wonders of this site. Tourists never come here. So why is Burzahom so significant and what secrets does it hold?
Burzahom, why Burzahom is important is there are a lot of reasons for that. Because it becomes one of the important sites on the fringe in the Himalayas particularly, which connects Central and South Asia. So in between this mountainous region, you have this very unique site, which was excavated in 1960s. Prior to that, 1935, SD Terra and T.T. Patterson, who conducted, a Yale-Cambridge expedition in Kashmir and other regions around in 1935 around. So they also saw this site as one of the important sites that connects two different cultural, domains of Central and South Asia. That's why when excavation started at the site, it was because of that the excavation that many things got exposed. That you have a huge skeletal remains from that site. It was unprecedented because nowhere in 1960s, prior to 1960s, nowhere in India, including whole of South Asia, such a huge skeletal, remains were found. So second important thing, which was very unique, was the material culture from the particular, site, which is to some extent very close to the Central Asia, even has a little bit Chinese affiliations. Even some people, see it very close to the Far East regions, and some say it has directly come from Central Asia via the Levant region in West Asia and all that. So there are a lot of comparisons people have made. So because of that, it got very unique status within the Himalayan region. And to be frank, that there was no other site in the Himalayan region prior to the excavation of Burzahom, which was known very very well known. Basically, that's why. To connect Central and South Asia, Himalayas played a very important role. And coming up from Himalayas, such a site like Burzahom, with huge material diversity, which connects both the regions, it became very important for many people.
At the museum run by the University of Kashmir, you can find the details of what was found in Burzahom. Skeletons of a man, a child, and animals. But what made this site really stand out in the early years after it was discovered in 1936 was the underground chambers or pits that many archaeologists believed were dwellings, quite like the igloos of the Eskimos. In 1936, an expedition led by Helmut de Terra and Dr. Thomson Patterson from the universities of Yale and Cambridge excavated this site and discovered the cultural remains which covered 3 different archaeological periods. People lived in Burzahom for millennia, and they left behind a range of everyday things that give us insights into their lives.
During excavations, what happened in 1960s, the excavation lasted for about 10 years. And there was a diverse opinion from the scholars who excavated, like Ian Kazanchi and many others who excavated. They come up with this theory that people were living at Burzahom in pits, like leveling pits, which was a quite, sort of a phenomena in archaeological studies, throughout South Asia. Quite number of places people have talked about, deviling pits. People were living in those pits for a long period of time. But recently, what happened that we have found number of sites in Kashmir Valley where those pits are visible. And then in many, excavations, which quite recently from last couple of years happened in, many other regions in South Asia, like in Pakistan and many other regions. So what happened that these deviling pits were, uh, to some extent, the theory of deviling pits was, put away by the people and talked about that these pits were actually granaries to store the, particular whatever produce they had, agricultural produce or whatever. So in our recent studies in Kashmir, particularly in Qasim Bagh and many other sites, like Petkurantang, there is another site, Ganderbal region. We saw these pits in the stratification, and we tried to analyze it on the basis of the evidence we have from Burzahom. And we were quite sure that these pits from new sites now produce a lot of material which is actually archaeobotanical in nature, and huge amount of seeds, grains were recovered from these pits. And from Burzahom, it was also reported that these pits had some, sort of archaeobotanical material that time. And then, despite that, people called these pits as deviling pits. So they translated these as deviling pits, that people were living in those pits. But that was not the case. Particularly, the recent research has suggested otherwise. As I said already, that these pits were, considered deviling pits now. Earlier, now we translate them to as storage pits. So basically, to our understanding, that there are number of post holes were also recovered during excavations. There were incidents where people, the people who excavated the site, they reported the post holes. That means that there was some structure above ground, where people must have been, living. And since the structure might have been only, of wooden nature, so wood perishes quite often in archaeological context. You do not find wood continuing, and the climate of Kashmir is also like that, that the wood cannot sustain for quite period of a long time. So because of that also, the things are very, very, difficult to understand, in fact, whether these pits could be considered, dwellings or not.
The famous dwelling pits that made Burzahom so famous came from period 1 of the site. It is the oldest and most significant part for many reasons. It is from this period that we see evidence of these subterranean chambers, crude pottery, and fishbone tools. The period saw burials with everyday material, grave goods like decorative beads, food grain, and lentils. We see major changes in the settlement pattern in period 2. Post holes have been found on the site indicating the foundations of mud brick houses above the ground. Human burials became even more prominent in this period, indicating an expansion of the settlement. The dead were usually buried under house floors or in compounds. No grave goods were found in these burials. But burials of domesticated animals along with humans have been found. The use of megaliths is a core feature of the megalithic period. The massive stone slabs resembling the ones in Stonehenge seem to have had some ritual or astronomical significance, but no concrete evidence of this has been found. Another artifact from Burzahom has created quite a stir far beyond the realm of history and archaeology. This etching, originally on a stone slab found at the site, bears a scene depicting two human figures and a dog hunting a stag. What is curious about the hunting scene, however, are the two concentric circles with 16 radiating lines all around. The depiction of two suns on the horizon has led some astronomy experts to speculate that this could represent the occurrence of a supernova incident. Astrophysicist M.N. Vahia Hrishikesh Jogelkar and Ankit Sule of Mumbai's Tata Institute of Fundamental Research or TIFR mapped the nearest visible supernova to 4600 BCE within the time period of these settlers. The celestial phenomenon was enormous at its peak. The supernova remnant HB9 is said to have glowed as bright as the moon.
What happened at Burzahom, there was during excavations, a small rock was, a stone slab or sort of a thing was recovered. And on that, there was a hunting scene where, people were, in a hunting posture, and there was a dog even there. And then near to the whole scene, there were two suns were shown on that. So many people have different translations about that. Some people say that this is a depiction of the earliest supernova because of the two suns on the stone slab. And some people say that this is a daily routine of the people at the site, and they have depicted it on, stone. And some people have even related this particular to some other astronomical phenomena, having two suns that was recorded some 5,000 years back. And there is a lot of some sort of a research by Tata Institute of Fundamental Research. There is Professor Wahia is there, and he has, to some extent, concluded that this particular stone slab has the earliest recorded supernova depictions on that. And that's why it becomes, again, very important. The site becomes important because you don't have any sort of evidence in South Asia like that from any Neolithic site or even Harappan site or somewhere else. So this becomes, again, a very important phenomenon to look at the site very differently. And it becomes very significant even, to relate it to the earliest astronomical, and then there are other things related to the astronomy at Burzahom. People have translated megaliths, which are thought to have, in the shape of the, Stonehenge. So that has, again, some astronomical, value for the people who are, basically from physics and many other astronomical, related disciplines.
Interestingly, excavations over the last few decades have shown that Burzahom was not just an isolated Neolithic site. A network of as many as 40 sites have been found across Kashmir, and they indicate strong linkages with Central Asia. The material evidence dating back to the early historic periods also shows the continuity of this cultural exchange well into the medieval and even early modern times. During the Chalcolithic phase, there is also a strong connection indicated between people living here and the Harappan world. Archaeologists believe that these sites indicate how Kashmir played an important role connecting Central Asia and the Indian subcontinent from the earliest times.
There is Burzahom, there is Gufkral, there is Kanispor in Baramulla, and there are many other sites. Almost 2 to 3 dozen sites have been reported from archaeological excavations and exploration so far. This Kanispor emerged as a Neolithic site as well, though it has been known as a very much for the early historic site of the Kushan period, but it has cultural deposits which date back to the Neolithic period as well. So overall, all these sites has a Neolithic, and to some extent, some sites has early historic material, Kushan material also. We had Gufral again, which gave clear evidence of the megalithic period, as well as some very interesting finds from the for the iron to be introduced in the Himalayan region, the earliest dates of iron from Kashmir Valley.
Kashmir is breathtakingly beautiful, and looking at the valley of Srinagar, it's hard to imagine that all this formed the base of a lake till not so long ago. Around 12,000 years ago, the waters of the lake began to drain, leaving the fertile bed or floor easily accessible and habitable for human settlers. This site of Burzahom may have been one of the many places where a settlement grew and thrived. The earliest evidence of agriculture here, for instance, comes from 3000 BCE.
Mountain chains have often integrated people rather than isolated them. This is a phenomenon which has, which was there, very well there in the earliest human societies, earliest human cultures. So people were always curious about what lies around them, what lies above the mountains, what lies beyond the rivers, and everything in the particular topography and all that. So considering this particular thing, and putting into the context of Kashmir Valley, and then how it played a very sort of a bridge between Central Asia and South Asia, is very important to understand. Recent studies have shown that migrations were happening from very very beginning. As I said earlier, that Ladakh was a region, while the earliest evidence of human existence have been quite recently recorded through archaeological studies. So these go back to more than 10,000 years. And then, these evidence are, of course, of the highland settlements. Ladakh obviously was a harsh region. It's still the harsh region to live in for the human beings. But in prehistory, the region was very much, harsh, and the climatic conditions were too, difficult to for the people, for the animals to survive. But in that particular times, in those times also, this particular region of the Ladakh region particularly had the evidence of the human beings which were traversing this whole region. So we have evidence from Ladakh, we have evidence from Zanskar, we have evidence now in Kashmir. So all these evidence combined, when we see the comparative, analysis of all these events, it has shown that the people were continuously in touch with one another. Throughout the Neolithic period, they were in touch with one another during the early historic period, and the connections grew more and more in that throughout the historical period as well. So then the trade was introduced, and many other things were introduced. But the earliest form of the connections are still to some extent unknown. But we can bridge a gap by considering Kashmir and by considering Burzahom in a sort of a bridge between the cultures of Central and South Asia, and it played that role for a very long period of time.
While we look at mountains as a divide, sites in Kashmir show that mountain chains have always integrated and brought people together, rather than isolated them. However, the information around Burzahom and the sites across Kashmir remains scanty, and this is sad because they could tell us so much more.